Perfect.
Hi there, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Jordan Przinski, and I serve as the Director of Membership with Good Business Colorado. Good Business Colorado is a statewide, nonpartisan business association of over 240 values-driven businesses who are committed to building a prosperous, equitable, and sustainable Colorado. Our members know that they have a role in shaping public policy that impacts our communities and businesses. We challenge the lines of partisanship and lead with our values. Before we kick off today's session, I'd like to say a huge thank you to our amazing partners and co-sponsors for today's virtual event. The Bell Policy Center, Best for Colorado, a program of the Alliance Center, the Colorado Black Chamber of Commerce, Center for Community Wealth Building, Rocky Mountain Microfinance Institute, and Small Business Majority. Thank you all so very much. After today's Q&A, you will receive an email with a feedback form and more information about each of our partner organizations. Please take a few moments to let us know what you thought of today's virtual event and learn a bit more about our partner organizations. For now, I'll go ahead and send it over to Lindsay Dakota to tell you a bit more about Small Business Majority.
Thank you so much, Jordan. And hi all, I'm Lindsay Dakota. I'm the Colorado Outreach Manager for Small Business Majority. A little bit about Small Business Majority is that we are a small business education and advocacy organization, and we are founded and run by small business owners. And we've been in business since 2005. We're a national nonprofit with offices all across America, including Washington, D.C., California, Colorado, Illinois, Maryland, and Virginia. And we really focus on advocacy and top important issues for small business owners, including access to capital, healthcare, retirement, entrepreneurship, taxes, and way more. Our online resource hub is located at venturize.org. I definitely suggest checking that out if you're a small business owner for resources and education tools, as well as all the other webinars we've been having surrounding COVID. So for now, I'll pass it on to Tyler from the Bell Policy Center. Thank you.
Hi there, this is Tyler Jekyll, Director of Policy Research at the Bell Policy Center, and we're a policy research and advocacy organization focused on economic mobility for all Coloradans, and that includes everything from early childhood policy to making sure that all Coloradans have a secure retirement. So also just during this pandemic, we've created a recovery hub where it has information on both things that are happening at the state level as well as the federal level. So you can access that at bellpolicy.org, and then there'll be a link to our recovery hub. I'm gonna hand it over to Karen.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us on Monday. Glad people don't have too much Zoom fatigue and are still able to join in on these virtual conversations. My name is Karen Moldovan. I'm the Director of Policy at Good Business Colorado, and I'm really thrilled just to be able to turn this conversation over to Representative Alex Valdez and Representative Colin Larson. I think what really excited us about the opportunity to have this conversation is that while they're both legislators and very busy with their work at the Colorado General Assembly, they're both also small business owners and are really navigating this crisis in the same way that you all are as small business owners firsthand. So Representative Larson owns a coffee shop, and Representative Valdez owns a solar business, and they too have been trying to figure out what we do, where we go from here. So the way we're going to structure this conversation is I think Representative Valdez is going to kick us off, then turn it over to Representative Larson. And then we'll have a moderated chat box. So I would certainly encourage folks, if you have any questions that come up, please put them in the chat box. Myself and Hunter from Small Business Majority will be moderating and sharing your questions. So we'll have a little bit of a discussion through that after each of our representatives talks a little bit. And it's just really a great time for us to learn from their sense of what we can expect with the budget, pending legislation, priorities, constituent needs. So we're just really thrilled to be able to have this bipartisan dialogue. I'll turn it over to Representative Valdez and then again Representative Larson, and then we'll have some time to take all your questions, and we'll end right at 2 p.m.
Hi everybody, and thank you Karen, and thank you everybody over at Good Business Colorado and all the partners for having this very important conversation about small business in general, and how we're going to recover from this unprecedented crisis that we find ourselves in today. Like Karen said, my name is Alex Valdez. I represent House District 5 that is downtown Denver and some of the lower highlands, and some of the areas surrounding downtown. And what makes this district really unique is that beyond being represented by a small business owner, it is a hub of small business. We have more restaurants, bars, and just general businesses of all sizes than any other district in the state of Colorado. So right from the beginning, I've been hearing from countless business owners at every level about the challenges that are being faced and things that we might be able to do when we get back to work. So just a little bit about myself. I am a small business owner. I became a small business owner because of an economic crisis, the 2008 downturn in the economy. I was an investment banker before that, had a great job, and when it collapsed, I found myself kind of out on the street like so many people and decided, you know, if I'm going to restart, I'm going to work for myself from now on. And I've been so lucky to have a business that has grown right out of the district that I represent now to become about 200 people strong and one of the largest renewable energy development companies in the state of Colorado. And so in politics, I always thought that there was this need to have voices of those who understood what it's like to kind of go through all of the challenges and the trials and tribulations that are small business. And that's really how I launched my political career, was understanding that we needed to have this broad-based knowledge of not only all of the social issues that we care so much about and all of the other issues, but also that we're looking out for those who are out working week in and week out to make a payroll and to, you know, provide benefits for their employees and do all those sorts of things. So it's been a very interesting experience. It's been a great experience because like Representative Larson, who I've developed a good friendship with on this small business side of things and having those discussions about understanding, making a payroll and all the things that go along with that. We've become kind of go-to people within our caucuses to discuss what small business, what medium business, what business is going through in general. So we're scheduled right now to go back into session on the 18th of May. And the reason for that is that we have a constitutional obligation to pass a budget for the state of Colorado. And without being too doom and gloom, because I'm sure everybody's had plenty of that in the past month and a half, you know, the outlook is pretty scary. We're going to have to cut a significant amount of money from the state budget. And so we're not looking forward to that part of the process that we have to do, but it is our constitutional duty to ensure that we do get a budget out there. And so I think that's immediately in front of us. I don't know that during that short session, we will spend much time doing other legislative activity. That will be a question that will be answered by our leadership once they see how many amendments we have to run to our budget, which right now I think stands in the 70 to 100 range. And so I know we're all going to be standing up and fighting for the things that we care about during that return to work for us. And then I think what I've already discussed with some of my colleagues, including Representative Larson, is looking at starting the conversation with Colorado small business, with Colorado business in general, about when we come back, how we can be prepared with legislation. Because the truth of the matter is, it's my belief that we won't truly know when we go back on May 18th what the true impact of COVID-19 is going to be on our business community. We're starting to see, obviously, some of the initial problems that are being caused by lack of customers and lack of being open, but we still don't really know the true long-term impact that this is going to have on our businesses. And so, you know, having that visualization within my business and seeing that we're seeing a downturn in sales, you know, because people are inherently a little more cautious about spending, I think that's a threat. But also that we see certain jurisdictions that are completely closed, certain jurisdictions that are open and things like that. And so jumping through those hoops is right now pretty difficult for many businesses. So we're excited to come back to work. I think that, you know, when I think of what is possible, first and foremost, think of simplification. We have a very complicated business taxation system in Colorado. We have a very, due to local control, which regardless of your opinions about that, we have a very patchwork system of requirements and regulations across our state. I think there are things that we can do. I think there are things that we can use this opportunity that's being presented to us through this crisis to simplify and make things a little bit easier for our businesses so they can spend more of their dollars employing folks, and of course building those businesses back up from this crisis. So I would say that's kind of just a general overview of where I'm at, and I will pass it back over to Karen for now, and look forward to answering any questions that I might be able to answer when the time comes.
Thank you so much. I think that was a really helpful overview. I think before we jump into questions, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Representative Larson. If you want to sort of give us your thoughts on lay of the land, what you're working on, what you're hearing, and then we'll just do kind of questions to both of you at the same time, if that works. So just want to remind folks, go ahead and use the chat box now, and we'll be flagging and tracking those for when we turn it over to Q&A.
Absolutely. And yeah, thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Representative Valdez, for getting us kicked off there. So my name is Colin Larson. I represent House District 22, which is largely the southern unincorporated portions of Jefferson County, the suburban neighborhoods of Ken Carroll, Dakota Ridge, kind of Columbine Valley area. So, thank you, guys. Heather, can we?
Oh, sorry guys. So let's just reminder for folks to be muted except for our presenters.
No worries there. So yeah, like I said, kind of that Columbine, Ken Carroll, Southern Jefferson County suburban area. You know, my business experience is a little bit different from Representative Valdez's in scale. I own independent coffee shops called Atlas Coffees. There's now 2 locations. But obviously, you know, we're talking about maybe 10 employees versus Rep Valdez, who's probably more on the 100 scale. But nonetheless, a small retail business. Very much, I would assume, in a similar situation with many of you, brick and mortar, very reliant on people coming in. It's been an interesting experience. Obviously, since I've been a legislator, I've taken a far more passive role in my business. I've been a silent partner since running for election in 2018 in my businesses. And fortunately, coffee is one of those things that has been able to make a pretty decent transition to carry out. However, a lot of my colleagues in the food services industry, more traditional restaurants, have been a lot more harmed during this shutdown just because of the realities. So some of the things I'm focused on when we come back, obviously we are going to be in a very dire budget situation here. Coming back, the latest I've heard from our Joint Budget Committee, which is the committee of, if you're not familiar with it, is the single most powerful committee in the entire state, 6 legislators that essentially set what we spend our money on. The latest figures I've heard from them have been that we're going to require anywhere from a $3 to a $4 billion reduction in our discretionary general fund, which will amount to something between 10 up to maybe perhaps even 30% of our discretionary dollars. So there's going to be a lot of trimming. And unfortunately, I think we're going to be cutting into some muscle and bone in some certain program areas here. I do think there's some opportunities to really get some efficiencies, take a look at a lot of these programs that have been continuing on for years that haven't necessarily gotten the scrutiny that they need. So I think hopefully we'll do a lot of focusing on that. But the reality is, with the scale of these kinds of cuts, we are most likely going to be looking at cutting into transportation funding, cutting into school finance funding, which are things that are troubling to me. Not to say that every dollar there has been spent perfectly, but I also am very concerned about the impacts that it could have on our schools and our transportation infrastructure, which, in my opinion, has been something that's been neglected for a long time. And I suspect that this crisis will further that neglect. On the business specific side, there's a couple of things that, again, I've spoken with Representative Valdez because he and I are some of the few people down there that have actually run a business that actually has payroll in the legislature. But some of the things I'm focused on in the near term, at the very least, is trying to mitigate the property tax issues that I think a lot of the businesses are going to be facing here. Not just the current property tax that they owe and getting a kind of grace period for the remittance of that, but something that I'm really concerned about is the reassessment for the 2021 tax year. These were done using 2019 revenue figures, which obviously are not relevant to the reality of what the value of retail commercial property is, given the coronavirus. And as we all know, commercial property tax rates are significantly higher by several times than what residential property taxpayers pay. And I'm concerned about a lot of retail businesses who maybe are able to weather the coronavirus impact through the calendar year of 2020, then being hit and saddled by a several $100 or $1,000 increase in their property tax bill due to a reassessment based on values that really aren't relevant anymore. So that's something that I've been pretty loud about, pushing for legislative fix on that. Another thing that I think we're going to have to take a very serious look at is liability protection and reform. I know a lot of retailers in specific are concerned about that, both from the employer relationship side, but also from a consumer standpoint. You know, if I were to reopen my small, boutique clothing business or whatever it might be, not having to worry about the threat of a lawsuit from somebody who comes in and then contracts coronavirus. So those are things I think that are important that we're going to need to take a pretty immediate look at. I'd like to see them addressed, frankly, in this little mini session that we have coming up here. Again, I think that will largely depend on the appetite amongst the other legislators, but it's something that I think is important, that I hope we can get some bipartisan buy-in on, because again, I think we all recognize that what we need to do, the top priority here should be getting the top priority obviously is defending public health, but then as much as we can, getting our businesses back to work, because ultimately that's where people are getting their paychecks. That's what's going to do far more good, is if we can get people back to work, back earning paychecks, back with that stability, so that they know that their families can be provided for. And then, from there, our revenue issues will be mitigated as well on the government side. So with that being said, I think I'll kind of hand it back over, and looking forward to hearing questions and answering those.
Thank you both. So while the questions are queuing up, I'll just remind everybody to please include them in the chat bar. And if you would, include the industry that you're coming from too, because that'll help us kind of frame some of these and just help us understand where some of the pain points are as well. Before we dive right into the questions, I think really quickly, both of you kind of alluded to some areas that you'd like to focus on when the legislature comes back. Just for folks that are listening in, it's often really tricky, particularly in Colorado, with strong home rule and a number of other legal issues. What levers do you view as being most relevant right now that the state legislature and the governor can use to support small business recovery as we start emerging from this crisis, or start thinking about a longer term strategy?
That's a great question. So one of the most frustrating things that I found in my short career as legislator thus far is that home rule is good and bad. And there's good aspects to it because it allows certain local governments to address business issues quicker, and it's not great in some areas because it creates kind of this patchwork that small business and business of all size has to approach our state with that they may not have to do in other states. As far as mechanisms and levers, the legislative things remain the same, and that is bringing best practices together from the different county and city governments that are home rule, and trying to implement some sort of standardization statewide in areas that we think are going to create business economic activity right away. I think that this crisis situation provides a unique opportunity for us to say it's time to do that. I think there's also kind of an argument around sales tax and just taxation in our state being exceptionally complicated. And there's been legislators who have come and gone and worked their entire career to try and fix that issue, but maybe the appetite is going to be there now to say, we really need to take care of this so we can help our employers statewide spend less time on the bureaucratic aspects of their business of doing the paperwork for all the different jurisdictions that they're in, and have a more streamlined way of paying taxes. Now, I think that that's kind of going to be the opportunity that we have is to move forward on approaching some of that simplification. That said, it's not going to be easy. Nothing ever is. But I think that given what's going on right now, we have an excellent opportunity.
Yeah, and I would agree with Representative Valdez there. I think that's more of a medium-term solution in terms of immediate powers that the legislature has. I think the single largest thing we can do at the state level is to kind of create an extension for the remittance of property taxes and for income taxes as well, which we already have done. And if we need to continue an extension for those remittances, I think that's probably the single most important and easy thing we can do. As you all know, like capital and cash flow right now are probably the biggest issues that are facing most businesses. And being able to hold on to that cash for an extra couple of months, certainly through this continually unstable, I think we're starting to see kind of an idea of what a return to the new normal is here, but I don't think we've arrived at that yet. And until we have a little more certainty about what that situation is going to look like, allowing businesses to hold on to that cash rather than remit it as either income or property tax, I think is an important step that we should really take. I know we've already pushed back into July, and further delaying those payments may be appropriate, or at least even if we don't delay the formal deadline, granting kind of a grace period, reducing penalties and fines for late payments on an ad hoc basis. It would be the most important thing we can do short term. And then, yes, exactly, medium term, things like looking at loosening licensing requirements, allowing for more acceptance of reciprocity for out-of-state licenses so that people who have moved back into the state because of economic situations or for family reasons can, practice on licenses they've gotten outside of the state, tackling our extremely complicated sales tax remittance policy, especially now that I think we're going to start to see a lot of retailers shift at least a portion of their business online that they maybe hadn't really focused on before. I think that could be very helpful. And then again, and this gets tricky because of the local control, but as I alluded to earlier, a freeze in the reassessed value for 2019. Unfortunately, there's a lot of constitutional issues there that would probably have to be worked out if we were to do a statewide freeze. But I think an important step that we could take is giving counties the authority to enact their own freezes in assessed value for a year would be tremendous. Also giving counties the authority to forgive the collection of business personal property tax for a year, I think would be tremendously helpful to a lot of businesses, especially more manufacturing or capital intensive industries. I think would be something we should seriously look at. At the state level, another policy that I've been talking about quite a bit is to increase or double that exemption that the state currently offers for business personal property tax. Because again, it's just getting into whatever we can do at the state level to keep liquidity in the hands of business owners, I think is going to be the most important thing over the next few months. So those are the things I'm really looking at. I do think there's a good chance of bipartisanship on those. Just sort of in a recognition of keeping our businesses afloat as much as possible, stopping businesses from going under and having to lay off employees. I think is good for everyone. It doesn't really have a partisan bent here. So.
Thank you to you both. There is so much to dive into. We know that none of this is going to be quick and easy, and that overlay, like you said, of what's local versus what can the state really make progress on it's on a lot of our minds. So I'll just jump into kind of a loaded question, if folks don't mind, but we'll love your thoughts on it. This is something we're definitely hearing some national dialogue about, and I know that there's differing opinions. So interested in your feedback. So this is from a participant who is in Southern Colorado and owns a senior citizens home care community. And looking at, because of the federal unemployment insurance benefits that are being combined with the state benefits right now, he's worried that some of his employees won't come back to work because they are getting, they're getting compensated now both through state and federal unemployment insurance. And the senior population is, of course, high risk. So they're concerned about getting COVID, transmitting COVID, all of that. But the owner of this industry, needs staff to be able to take care of this high risk population. So it's a pretty complicated, loaded question around the sort of state federal intersection of unemployment insurance and what that means for a high risk workforce. But I just wanted to put that out there to both of you and just see what kind of conversations you're having about unemployment insurance.
Great question. So first and foremost, I think that almost every business that found themselves in a situation where they had to furlough or lay off people that are in kind of that entry level area of their business are now running into this issue of having to compete with UI in bringing people back. This is something that is an unintended consequence, but I had a conversation with Senator Michael Bennet on Friday afternoon. I had a call with him and discussed this issue with him because it is becoming an issue, especially for restaurants, bars, and some of those businesses that really make up a lot of the service industry in my district. And they're aware of it. The intention was that they would replace, people's full income and earnings, and that was a good cause. They didn't want folks to be short on rent. They didn't want folks to take a significant hit from moving from their job to unemployment. They are actively working on additional legislation to kind of clean this up and to make sure that they address this issue. Because right now it is going to be a problem. There are folks that it's advantageous for them to stay in the UI, on UI, as opposed to coming back to the job that they were furloughed or laid off from. So they're working on it. There's not an easy answer because you want to make sure that folks have the money to live and to make their rent and to keep spending money at their local businesses. And but it's also a situation where we need those folks to come back to work if we're going to get back to something normal. And then with the senior side, I think that's the healthcare side of that is the biggest concern. I think that the governor, in conversations that I've had with him, this has been his top priority. The top part of his administration is to ensure that we have a really good plan for those who work with seniors to protect them and to ensure that the PPE, the testing, all of the resources that are needed to ensure that those folks' health is prioritized are getting to them. And so that's something I think that we've been kind of lucky to have a governor who is ahead of the curve on that, and that we are starting to see improvement in those areas, but something that still remains a top priority that we need to ensure when we have folks coming into our long-term care homes, into assisted living, into home health care, that they have all of the resources they need to know that they either have had an antibodies test and that we understand the ramifications of an antibodies test, that we have all of the PPE that those people will need to be safe when they are in close proximity to our seniors, and also to ensure that we have strict protocols to protect those folks. So that's what I would say on that question.
Sure. And yeah, I mean, in terms of the UI, I agree that the way that the federal government designed it, the initial rollout of the program, in my view, and again, I'm a Republican, so it may be different than Representative Valdez's, very problematic. Obviously unemployment insurance exists as a safety net. That's the intention of the program, is for people who have lost their job to have a sustainable level of income for a very short temporary number of days to get sort of back on their feet. With the federal supplement, I think we've gone way past that. There are some instances where people can make $65,000, $70,000 a year in certain states, which is just simply not. That's going well beyond what a safety net uninsurance or unemployment insurance program would be designed to do. So I do think that there's some perverse incentives there. I do hope that there's a federal fix for it. I like Representative Valdez, have been in touch with some of my federal representatives as U.S. Senator Cory Gardner as well. And I do think that there's going to kind of be a readjustment. What I really don't want to see is I remember back in the 2009 recession, back when there was an extension. It wasn't so much the monthly benefit at that point, but it was the duration where unemployment benefits were available for upwards or almost 2 full years. I believe it was the 99-month cutoff had become a sort of talking point. But that's simply moving way past the point of an insurance program and more into a lifestyle shift, which is problematic, because I think most people would prefer to be working, but if we've designed a system where it's in their economic interest to remain on unemployment rather than seeking employment, I don't think that's good for our businesses. I don't think that's good for our economy. So I'm hoping that we'll see a readjustment here. Similarly with PPP, I think a lot of the, or not PPP, sorry, the Paycheck Protection Act, I understand the desire for the program. I think, unfortunately, the way it was designed is that a lot of businesses that were either not necessarily directly impacted by COVID-19, businesses that were floundering before the crisis were accessing it and using it to keep them afloat, or businesses, frankly, that weren't really impacted by the crisis but simply wanted to apply for it because it was a good deal. And that's the thing that concerns me, is a lot of these COVID response, particularly coming from the federal government, seem to be rather broad sweeping. And I understand that they were designed quickly because there was a emerging crisis. So I get why that was done. But a lot of these programs are so broad that they're ending up applying to situations that I don't think they were ever intended to do. The Paycheck Protection Act was not intended to prevent businesses that were not economically viable in normal economic conditions from going under. And it was also not designed to keep businesses that were not really impacted by COVID afloat and to give them a cash infusion. I think one of the more egregious examples I remember hearing from outside of New York was that there was the pharmaceutical device company that actually produces tests for COVID that received a large PPA payment. And I mean, their business is going up right now, but they're getting a chunk of the federal program that was designed to prevent businesses from going under because of this. I think that's an example of how this program was not really fine-tuned. And I hope as we continue to roll it out and put more money into it, that the parameters are very much narrowed to apply specifically to businesses that, through no fault of their own, very specific to the COVID crisis, have hit cash flow issues, and they're being utilized to keep them afloat through that crisis. What I don't want to see is this being used as a general kind of business bailout, and this money get diverted. Because again, the thing that we're not really coming to terms with at this point that does have me concerned is we're adding a tremendous amount of debt at the federal level. At the state level, we're legally not allowed to add debt because we have to pass a balanced budget every year. But at the federal level, I mean, we are deficit spending at a level that we have never seen before. And to a certain extent, we need to do that because we're in a crisis right now, but we need to be very cognizant of the fact that we're going to have to pay this back. And make sure that this money that we're spending is narrowly tailored and it's something that we can recapture, and that we're not just writing blank checks for political expediency. So those are some of the things that have me a little bit concerned. And then specifically to pivot to the senior care question, that's an industry where I would love, frankly, to hear and perhaps go one-on-one offline with the specific business owner, because again, it's a critical need. It's an extraordinarily vulnerable population. All the data is pointing to this is where the real crisis and the real vulnerability is in these senior care centers. And getting trained staff, having as minimal levels of turnover right now that we can, is important, not just for the health of the business, but for the health of the individuals living there. So I'd love to hear more about what they're experiencing specifically. I will will cop to the fact that I'm not an expert in that particular industry, but I would love to hear more of what they're experiencing and some of their ideas. If they want to take that offline, I'd love to connect with you later.
Thank you both for that. And I mean, I think one thing that's interesting to point out too is the abuse of PPP seems to be a bipartisan, or the concerns about the abuse of PPP also appear to be a bipartisan issue right now. And to pivot a little bit too, I think both of you have touched on the issue of immediate cash flow assistance. And one of the folks on here asked a really interesting question that we've heard a couple times over the course of, I guess, the last 2 months, is that liability insurance doesn't appear to cover pandemic within the claim. What suggestions do either of you have on how to address that, especially because it appears this person has been up to date on paying premiums? And then pivoting a little bit to your role as state legislators, is there anything we can do at the state capitol to sort of either incentivize insurance companies to pay out those claims, or what other options do we have on that end, since it appears a number of folks are paying into an insurance program that's intended to cover these losses, and they are being denied currently?
Yeah, that's difficult. We've been hearing more and more about that from the different chambers about businesses who applied for claims, or are preparing to apply for claims under their liability insurance, and finding out that force majeure does not include pandemics or any kind of coverages for that. I think that's something that we need to explore when we return to session, because these are very complicated issues. Some of the regulations lie on the federal level. Some of them have been worked out in Washington. Some of them worked out in our state legislature. I think that the best thing that we can do right now is to be listening to these companies and learning, what is it that they're running into specifically? What are the answers that they're getting back? Are there insurance companies that are paying benefits under policies? What are the differences between those policies? I think to better understand the issue is where we need to start as legislators. And right now, this is new. Actually, I just started hearing about that this week. And so I can't give the best answer right now because I haven't had an opportunity to really look into the legal side of this. Because what we're finding is when we're hearing about things like rent assistance and deferring rent and things of that nature, that we have a clear understanding of who we need to be talking to in the chain of command, so to speak, where politics comes into play. This is an issue where that's somewhat ambiguous, because those policy definitions are created by attorneys, and those they vary from policy to policy, company to company. So I definitely think this is something we need to do, because as people come back to work, as people implement rules that that the state government is telling them to do, where social distancing, masks, and cleanliness are concerned, that there are significant liability issues that we need to address for our businesses. Most Colorado businesses do not specialize in the prevention of virus transmission. And so we need to look at how we're going to protect those businesses so they can get back to work, and so they can do what they need to do to restore revenue and to restore their payroll. So long story short, there's work to be done there. I'd like to be able to give a great answer right now as to how that works, but we're going to have to look more into that as we go back, and maybe Rep. Larson has more on that.
No, and actually, I pretty much echo a lot of what Representative Valdez said there. This is an issue that's frankly new to me, or fairly new. Obviously, I've been hearing from a few constituents about it. And frankly, it's a little bit troubling. I am not a lawyer, and I am not well versed in the intricacies of contract law and insurance, but I do think it is something that needs to definitely be looked at, because for all of these businesses that have been purchasing these products, to then go and file a claim and be denied, on the basis that it's a sort of pandemic, that it's an exclusionary clause. I think it's very troubling. I don't want to pass judgment on insurance companies at this point, but I'm just not entirely sure that these products were portrayed in the right way. If there was an exclusion for something like this, was that made clear to people at the time of the purchase of the product and the marketing? So this is something that's very new that I think we are definitely going to need clarification on sooner rather than later when we return. But again, it's at this point not something that I know enough about in the intricacies of contract law, frankly, that I think needs to be explored. But we definitely need to get clarity because, again, I've heard from a few businesses on this, and to be paying these premiums, which I'm sure are not cheap, giving in exchange for the peace of mind that you had, and then to go and file a claim and then to be denied is one of the worst things I could imagine at this point. So definitely something that needs clarity. I would be shocked if we're not dealing with legislation on it in the upcoming legislative session, but do not have a definitive answer at this point, unfortunately.
Thank you both for that. And I think that's one thing that I really like about this format is it just provides an opportunity for all of us to hear directly what's on business owners' minds. And even though we may not have all the answers figured out right now, this is information that you all can take when you go back to the Capitol. Hearing directly how, pretty painful to pay an insurance premium for 43 years and then not be able to have any sort of recourse from pandemic loss. So yeah, thank you both for sharing your thoughts on that. Another question, and this one might be a little tricky too, so it might be something we're all just sort of thinking through. Since we have, these federal programs like the PPP loan, and then state programs like unemployment insurance and the Colorado Workshare program that are being administered through the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, some businesses are really having a hard time not being able to apply for both because it's seen as double dipping. So, a business, for example, needed the PPP loan to keep some of their employees on payroll, but then also did have to lay off some employees that needed unemployment insurance and could benefit from the Workshare program as well. So is there anything that can be done with this sort of state-federal connection so that businesses have access to sort of all of these programs without having to sort of pick one that might work best when actually they do kind of need a combination of both state and federal resources?
Yeah, I think we're going to have to align a lot of our policies with the changes that we've seen kind of as as Rep. Larson alluded to. A lot of this is being done in real time. That is causing us a lot of heartburn because we know we have to do the work to align our state policy with new federal policy, new ways of helping folks have access to the money. The PPP has been a very interesting thing to see because when it was first released and they announced that they were going to be putting $350 billion towards small business, I'm sure a lot of people were like, that's great. I was thinking, I think that's going to have to be more like $3 trillion to have a significant impact. We're talking a significant amount of companies. Guidance on how the PPP and the forgiveness aspects of the PPP, which essentially there's a spreadsheet that they sent out and kept changing over and over again, that would allow employers to calculate how they could use the PPP to carry their payroll as opposed to having people be laid off or furloughed. Now there's the issue of many employers who have PPP loans trying to call their employees to come back, and the employees telling them no, as we discussed in a previous part of the conversation. I think there's so many things that we're going to have to do, but personally I'm excited about it because this is a unique perspective that we can bring back to the State House of saying, all of these programs are meant to do well, but they're not going to do well unless we do our part, which is to ensure that we streamline our state policies to be congruent with federal policy to help our businesses access the most aid possible. Now, on the good side of that, one of the statistics that's been really positive about Colorado is that Colorado has received, I think we're 8th out of 50 states in PPP loans that have been granted to our businesses. So we're way ahead of the curve as a whole in our businesses getting PPP loans. That said, I'm getting most of the calls that I'm fielding from small business owners are about PPP and their inability to get through to their bank. they're getting no response. They're not able to get through. They're not able to talk to somebody. And I think that seeing how this is evolving and seeing the panic in those who aren't getting access to this is just showing that we as a state need to have our Office of Economic Development, our Department of Labor and Employment built in such a way that they can help to respond to the needs of our businesses in these areas, instead of just saying, you know, good luck calling your bank. There should be some ability that we can help. So there's a lot of alignment that we're going to be doing when we get back to work. I think that that's something that we're already thinking about, we're already talking about. But that said, things are changing in real time. So by the time we go back in 2 weeks from today, I would anticipate that there'll be a whole new set of policies potentially headed to us from Washington. And so we're just trying to keep up. And but rest assured, that is something that I think that we will be able to catch up. We will be able to make better for Colorado's business folks.
Yeah, and just to pile on there, exactly. I mean, I do think there's quite a bit that we can do at the state level to at least streamline and align our eligibility and requirements. Obviously, some of the requirements for the federal programs are dictated by federal legislation, but to the extent possible at the state level, ensuring that the programs that we are able to do as a state don't inadvertently make you ineligible for federal programs that may complement, I think is something that we should be prioritizing when we do come back for the legislative session. Because again, I mean, this is unprecedented, and unlike other economic downturns, I mean, the economic damage inflicted on the businesses is the direct result of government action. And because of that, you know, we need to make sure that the government actions taken to mitigate that, you know, are appropriate, and that we're not creating more bureaucracy and detracting from people's ability to get back and work on their businesses. If you have to spend, I mean, you know, gosh, I remember when I opened up my coffee shop in 2014, I would spend almost as much time in the back room, you know, dealing with various vendors on hold, trying to navigate, you know, the Wells Fargo payment processing center, or, you know, whatever it may be. And those were private businesses that, you know, there was some level of accountability with their customer service department. What I do not want to create a situation is where business owners have to spend hours upon hours with various state and federal agencies on the phone, on helplines, waiting to get clarification on accessing these programs, where, you know, frankly, figuring out whether or not they're in compliance is almost, you know, taking more time than just getting back to work. So I do think that there's quite a bit we can do in streamlining and making sure that the few state programs that we have, you know, are aligned, and that at least the eligibility requirements are aligned with the federal aid available. I do also hope that at the federal level that the feds take similar action, because unfortunately a lot of these programs, and a lot of the major ones, just because of the natures of our governments, in fact, Colorado has to live within its means, and the federal government can, you know, print as much money as they like. A lot of the major financial programs are going to be coming from the federal government rather than the state level. So I do hope that as the crisis continues and as the reopening happens, that the federal government makes sure that these eligibility requirements are aligned with the states. They give more flexibility to work with state programs, so that we're not running into the situation where state governments are really, you know, tapped out, and we're just kind of at the mercy of a federal program that says, well, these are the eligibility requirements, so you have to choose exactly like you've laid out here. You have to choose either between the federal aid or the state program, when in fact it would work much better in tandem or complementary, or perhaps utilizing partial federal benefit and then a partial state benefit. But again, because there's so many different industries that are impacted in so many different ways, as much flexibility as we can offer with these programs, I think is going to be important. Because obviously the recovery for restaurants is going to look very different than what the recovery is going to look like for gyms or ski areas. You know, there's a whole slew of industry that, you know, it's just they're gonna reopen at different times. They're gonna have demand return at different times, and they're gonna require different flexible programs that are more specific. So yeah, so as much as we can make these programs as flexible as possible, as least prescriptive as possible, I think is going to be important.
Thank you. So we're coming up on time, and if you thought both of you were going to get out of this conversation without having to address Tabor in some respect, you were wrong. So we had a question earlier on about how is Tabor going to impact our revenue outlook for the next several years? How is that going to play into our recovery? And then just as an aside, what short of direct cash payments, which has kind of been the federal government's strategy for the moment, how can the state play an active role in stimulating demand, which I think both of you have mentioned as being a core issue right now, without really having a heavy hand or increasing complexity for the folks on the ground?
Yeah, here's a fun one. I think me and Rep. Larson are going to differ a little bit on our answer here, but here's what I would say. The harm from that I believe Tabor has done is already done, in the sense that our reserves are a bit problematic in the state. Our ability to recover is limited percentage-wise by how much we can come back from something like this. We're already 48th in the nation in education funding. Our transportation system, as Rep. Larson alluded to, is in shambles, and so Tabor's going to have a significant impact here. I think the question is, are we able to really draw the parallels to that now? When it comes to our ability as a state to make direct cash payments or any sort of economic help to the small businesses and to the businesses in the state, that's also not possible, because we can't generate revenue to fund those programs without a vote of the people. So unlike many states, bigger states that are fortunate to not have Tabor, there is a situation where we're not going to be able as a state to create any sort of direct economic impact. Our ability as a state government is really going to be to lower barriers, simplify things. I mean, that's the painful thing about sometimes being in the state legislature, is that we don't have the funds to spend. Even in a good year, we really don't have money to spend on programs that would benefit small business or business of any kind, or education or anything, because we're so hamstrung by the 1992 passage of Tabor. So while I'm sure we're going to have some differing opinions on Tabor as a core, I think we're all seeing the results of Tabor, and that is every time you're driving through a pothole, or you're dropping your kid off at an underperforming school, and now this, where we're going to see a massive decline in our state revenue and a very slow recovery because we're constitutionally prohibited from raising tax. Even if we recovered, quickly, we as a state government will not. And so the heartburn that we're going to feel from COVID-19 is going to last a long time. It will last us longer in Colorado than it will most other states. It is my hope that one day the business community, who stands to benefit the most from the relaxation of Tabor, because ultimately a lot of spending on transportation, a lot of spending on infrastructure and those sorts of things are beneficial to our businesses. I think that there's always that hope that we will realize that this was not the way to rein in government spending. Not to say that shouldn't be done, but there are better ways to do it. And I think the heartburn that we're going to feel as a state, that we're already feeling, is about to get a lot worse. And so I want to, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but there isn't really a pretty picture that we're looking at the state capitol. And even if all of the federal government spending that is dumped in here into the state becomes a reality, we still have we have massive holes to fill before COVID even happened. So it's going to be tough. And like I said, I really do hope that one day the business community comes together in a realization that we would all benefit from, taking care of these issues as opposed to watching them get worse. So that's my 2 cents. I represent one side, and I'll throw it over to Rep. Larson for the other side.
Indeed, and Representative Valdez is correct in that we do have very different takes on this particular issue. So I'm a big fan of Tabor, have been since well before this. I think contrary, and we will see Rep. Valdez, who is right on this, I actually think Tabor will position us for a faster recovery than most states on average. If you look at our recovery from the 2008 financial crisis recession, Colorado's was much faster and much more robust because unlike California or some of the other states with a heavily progressive income tax system, which is very much subject to a boom and bust, where the good times, they're cash flush, there's plenty of money to spend on programs. And then in the bad times, the recession gets so bad and the revenue situation becomes so bad that those programs are then clawed back and you have real crises. Unlike that, Tabor provides stability and predictability in our revenue system and constrains the growth of government year over year. Which is not to say that the state government does not still grow. Colorado is pretty much smack dab in the middle of states in terms of per capita expenditure. We simply devolve a lot of our taxation and expenditure down to our local levels because we have such a robust local control here in Colorado. And then obviously, the school finance situation is a separate issue. While it is true that as a state budget, we tend to spend a little bit less on schools than some of our compatriots. When you look at the total spending on schools, it's a very differing situation. There's a lot of inequity in the system, admittedly, because some locals are able to, spend a lot more money if you have a good property tax base. A lot of those school districts are spending quite a bit per pupil, whereas some of the states or some of the areas that don't have a good property tax base are spending a little bit less. But it's a very complicated issue and isn't as simple as just state funding levels. And I think Tabor's a relatively small portion of that. But like I said, I think Colorado is well positioned for recovery when we come back as far as the revenue side, simply because we have an extremely predictable income tax system here in Colorado. I mean, you pay 4.63% on the first dollar you make, and you pay that on the millionth dollar you make. So there's no question of shifting liabilities, having to hire, if you have the resources, a team of accountants to kind of shield yourself from those tax liabilities. It's very predictable. It's very stable, which I think all of us as business owners know that stability is probably the most important thing. I know it is for me. And going forward, I think that's going to make Colorado a more attractive place for businesses to do business. And I think it's going to make it easier for us to recover when we come back, because we're not worrying about, hey, okay, I used to make this much revenue and it's going to push me into a new tax bracket, or the unpredictability of being able to attract new staff. I know there's been some, talk about some ballot issues, attempting to rewrite Tabor, anything from removing its provisions from the state constitution to introducing a progressive taxation system in Colorado. I think those would be mistakes. Like I said, I think that flat taxation system at the state level is really, frankly, one of the best economic tools we have as a state for our competitiveness. When businesses are looking to relocate or move employees, it's something that is often cited by major corporations as reasons that they choose Colorado over competitors, is that it's a very predictable taxation environment. I think it'd be a mistake to give that up. And I hope, and I frankly trust that the people of Colorado will continue their support for Tabor, which has borne out pretty much every time it's been on the ballot. And I suspect that will continue. This environment right now, I don't think it's ever a good time to, raise taxes or eliminate Tabor. I think that 2020 would be possibly the absolute worst time when businesses are reeling from an unprecedented economic crisis. To contemplate a tax increase, I think, would be just about the worst thing we could do for our business environment. I think, like I said, as much as possible, we can focus on stability and the status quo here, or providing temporary relief, temporary freezes in valuation changes, temporary or perhaps indeed even permanent reductions in tax rates. I think, again, probably more on the property tax side would be the more efficacious use of those policies. But I think those are the things that we should be looking at. I think that Tabor has set us up well for that. I think there's a culture in Colorado, even though the political winds, in terms of elected officials, has certainly shifted more toward the Democratic side than the Republican side. I think when we look at ballot initiatives and the consistent behavior of voters across the board, I do think we're still a fiscally conservative state, and I love it. That's the state I grew up in. That's I hope that continues. I know that might not be the prevailing opinion of Representative Valdez and some of my compatriots down there at the Capitol. But I do think it's the right thing to do. And I think certainly from a business perspective, keeping that flat tax rate, keeping our taxes low and predictable is good. And I do think, in a year or two from now, when we are going through recovery and watching the different states and their levels of recovery, I do think that Tabor, just like it did in the last recession, will ultimately prove to be a boon and prove to make Colorado more resilient and more able to recover from this recession than it otherwise would have been. So.
Thank you, but you guys, we're at time, which is, I feel like this conversation went by really quickly, and there are a lot of questions that we didn't get to. So just sort of in transparency for what business owners are thinking about, definitely questions around how the legislature can support or extend executive orders that may apply to commercial rents and evictions, foreclosures. How do we protect our small brick and mortars? As you all engage with the federal delegation, connecting with that delegation to really study the data of how businesses owned by immigrants and people of color haven't been able to access these relief programs, and what can we do to ensure equity and the folks getting these loans are the people who need to. And then I guess I would just want to say to everyone, certainly we've heard different ideas on how we all move forward, but I think it's so appreciated to have this dialogue. I'm not sure exactly how the legislature is going to do sort of public hearings when you all reconvene and what citizen engagement sort of looks like moving forward, but we all know that is a huge part of our democratic process. So I just want to encourage folks, to continue this dialogue once we see the legislature reconvene, and Good Business Colorado Small Business Majority, the Bell Policy Center, and our partners will try to continue to have these type of avenues so we can have some real discussions on how we move forward. So I think Deborah's going to tell us goodbye, but thank you to everybody for your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Karen and Jordan, the Good Business Colorado team, for helping to organize this. Thank you so much, Representative Larson and Representative Valdez, for joining us and having such a great conversation. As Karen said, we look forward to continuing it. A huge thanks to our event co-sponsors, the Bell Policy Center, Best for Colorado, the Colorado Black Chamber of Commerce, the Center for Community Wealth Building, Good Business Colorado, Rocky Mountain Microfinance Institute, and Small Business Majority. This is a part of a series of a lot of different curriculum we're putting together to help small businesses weather the storm. And so we would really appreciate everyone who is on this call taking the time to take our 2-minute super fast survey to let us know how helpful this event was, as well as provide input on future programming that will be beneficial for your businesses. Thanks again so much, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah.